Los Angeles, and now I've been to space, and it's all thanks to these guys. David, CCP, how you guys doing? How's your E3 rocking?
It's off to a great start. We're having a blast here. I mean, you're getting to play Valkyrie on the latest Oculus Rift kits, the DK2s. We also got Valkyrie running in the Sony booth on Project Morpheus. You can take a look here at EVE Online as well. We're having a great show so far.
Excellent. Let's sort of touch upon the technology briefly, because we've tried Oculus before. Morpheus is a new thing for us, and perhaps a new thing for you guys. How are you guys finding the different technologies and working that for Valkyrie?
Yeah, they're both very different, but they're also both very similar, right? There's a lot of the optics, if you will, that are very similar between the two, but a lot of the machinery underneath, if you will, is a little different. It's no different in many ways than being an early developer on a new console generation, right? You had a lot of developers out there who were working on games for example, Xbox One and PS4 at the same time, and it's a similar process in that regard, in that, yeah, there's differences in the hardware, but at the end of the day, it is pretty much about, look, there's a particular gaming experience we're trying to make. We're trying to get the graphical fidelity right, the audio working, and things like that, and in the end, you end up working very closely with your platform partners, and in this case for us, it's both with Oculus and with Sony, where the engineers on both sides are getting a little closer to the metal, if you will, in the relationship, because there aren't a lot of games on either platform to look at, and there isn't a lot of, how would I say, predecessors in the market for virtual reality of how to make a title like this actually work. You don't have the same body of white papers and APIs and things like that. So in a lot of ways, CCP is working both very well with Sony and Oculus to make these things happen together.
And sort of with Valkyrie, starts off as tech demo, turns into a fully fledged game. What's the idea? What's the idea for this game for releasing, and how it fits in with the wider EVE universe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, EVE, in a lot of ways, EVE VR, the tech demo that we talk about that came out in 2013 at FanFest, part of why we were able to make this thing into a real game so quickly is it does tie very deeply and draw from the EVE universe that we've been running for 10 years now, right? And, you know, EVE has a lot of, there's spaceships, there's nebulas, there's planets, there's all these assets that were already out there that when you build a giant universe of 7,000 solar systems and tens of thousands of planets, there's a lot of stuff to draw from there. And so bringing some of those assets onto the early Rift prototype kits was a challenge in many ways to sort of like get the moment-to-moment experience of virtual reality right, but bringing a rich history and legacy to that was not the hard part. And I think in a lot of ways that gave CCP a bit of an advantage of, hey, here's prototype hardware. We've always had a bit of an affinity for virtual reality. We've always talked about this crazy ambition to create virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. And now suddenly you have that input-output rendering device that maybe makes that possible. So of course it was something we had a lot of passion for, but it really was the sort of the gifted engineering that a handful of guys in the company were able to actually make this work very well and bring it to a prototype stage at FanFest. Now, that's all it was at the time. We knew we had something cool and fun, but we didn't really imagine that it was something that felt like a full game at the moment, right? The company was very deep with EVE Online, with Dust 514, and when Valkyrie started to become something that had not just a resonance within our fan base, but also bringing it to E3 last year and getting the acclaim there, we're like, all right, this feels like a real game. This feels like a change that is happening in our industry, where the idea of virtual reality isn't just merely these fads that have happened in the past, right? These sort of little quirky ideas and gimmicky attempts. No, there is something very powerful here that's happening. And so bringing it into the rest of the EVE universe as a full-fledged member is super important for us, because again, we've got a high-fidelity universe, we've got a rich economy, we've got a very vocal player base that has been shaping this universe for us, and so Valkyrie has to fit in that very nicely. We've talked a little bit at FanFest about the lore behind Valkyrie now, like how it makes sense that a Valkyrie pilot exists in the EVE universe alongside Capsuleers and Immortal Mercenaries, but there's a lot more to reveal. And we have talked about doing our comic book now with Dark Horse, where we're going to get into that backstory a little more. And in many ways, I think getting one thing with Valkyrie that's a little different than the other titles is just the fact that when you're in a virtual reality game, the audio is so important because again, that level of immersion is so much higher. I'm not sitting at a couch looking at my television set or sitting at my mouse and keyboard looking at my monitor. I'm really in the universe, and so this was one of those things that we felt like we had to go just a little further than we have in the past, and in this case, going forward and getting the right voice actor for Valkyrie and bringing in Katie Sackhoff to be the voice of Round, the original Valkyrie pilot. It was a no-brainer for us, and we're thrilled to have her on board. And as you were able to hear, she's already in the game at this point.
Well, how does it fit in with EVE? For example, with Dust 514, even though feet on the ground, you acknowledge that there's ships above you and the stars above you, so that you feel connected to the wider EVE universe there and then. Does Valkyrie is it within the universe but sit apart, so you'll go in and play dogfights, but that will be separate from the ongoing rolling universe?
Well, so these are some details we're still figuring out at a high level. I mean, one thing we do believe is that, for example, there will be a shared economy across all of these games, right? That you'll be earning resources as you play the game, and those resources will be fungible ultimately across the entire New Eden economy, so that there will be resources that you can earn in Valkyrie that are valuable to you, but maybe they're actually more valuable to a Capsuleer in EVE or a Mercenary in Dust. And in a meta market sense, that'll be some of how the engines of supply and demand and war end up running in EVE Online by themselves. There are sort of deeper connections on things like corporations. There's the idea of, how we talked about at FanFest a little bit about the idea of, well, I as a member of the New Eden universe, right? I am a person who has basically a consciousness that I can pod into multiple different clones, right? And so why couldn't you, and the idea we teased at FanFest is, why couldn't you have a consciousness, your own, that you take into a Capsuleer body when you're playing EVE Online, into a Mercenary body that maybe is bulkier with reinforced metal and bone and things like that to go out and take a few punches on the battlefield, and a very different sort of clone that you take into a Valkyrie ship. So there's a certain sense of, I am still the original protagonist of my own story. I'm just simply entering different media to go ahead and participate in the EVE universe. Now, part of what you're asking as well, I think, is that if you think about Dust 514, there was a signature feature there of orbital bombardment, right? Of a payload from space from an EVE Online player impacting a battlefield on the PlayStation 3 for Dust 514 Mercenaries. That's a level that we are thinking about, but in a world of virtual reality, right? I mean, really feeling like we're the first big game to be on both of those platforms. There's a very difficult sort of balance of moment-to-moment experience to get right. And unlike in Dust, where, hey, there are a lot of first-person shooters, and we know what those look like, and our gamers know what to expect, we felt like the right way to start with Valkyrie was to focus on that moment-to-moment experience first. Make that right, polish it at the highest level of fidelity possible, and at the same time, then start exploring what might the orbital bombardment sort of thing between Valkyrie and EVE, or Valkyrie and Dust, be. That comes soon.
So there's options there in the future to decide how you're going to move this forward. So whilst in the demo period, demo pod, we saw like a very brief sort of 3-minute dogfight, very intense. There's a possibility of going to different places, maybe different objectives, and expand out there. But you guys are exploring that. I'm sure the fan base has been very vocal in their suggestions on what to do, right?
Well, there's plenty of ideas there, right? And again, the sense of some level of, EVE itself has this engine underneath it of, yes, I'm flying a spaceship, I'm visiting planets, I'm harvesting, I'm mining, I'm fighting and things like that. They're analogs for those things that we need to bring to Valkyrie, and we will. But there's also sort of a sense of, look, there's the progression I have as a player and as a character, right? That in EVE and in Dust both, I don't just earn currency, I earn skill points, and those skill points are used to unlock the ability to use better equipment, which then my currencies allow me to purchase. Valkyrie is going to bring a lot more of that. All you're seeing at this point in the demo is literally that pulse-pounding dogfight sort of thing. But in between the dogfights, right, if you will, there needs to be that idea of, okay, I'm a character, I am progressing, I am earning currency, I am unlocking new skills, I am fitting my ship a little differently, because this is a big part of customization in the EVE universe of how do I tweak my own bindings and such to make myself contribute to the group faster and to still retain my own individual way of playing and fighting, right? This is very much what's on the immediate roadmap for Valkyrie. And we talked about this a bit at FanFest in terms of the roles that we're building things around, how we're going to put fittings in there and such. But you're going to see that soon. It's not in the demo that you see now.
Okay. Let's touch upon Legion then. During the presentation we saw today, you guys talked about getting back to that core philosophy about how a first-person shooter game can tie into the wider EVE universe. And I just wondered whether you did that with the unconscious thought of perhaps things that you guys tried to implement in Dust 514 that didn't quite get to the standard that you wanted, and you thought, okay, time to sort of refresh, retry. What's the philosophy? No,
I think that's a very fair point of view, right? Dust, we had a great ambition for, and it was an ambition and a vision that the community really rallied around, and a lot of excitement there. The execution on it was a bit more challenging, right? as a company, had never made a console game before. We'd never made a shooter before. We'd never made a free-to-play game before. You know, these were all new things for CCP. And somewhere in the path of, okay, look, we've had a strong start with Dust, right? We've got the core experience of a first-person shooter. We've put it in the EVE universe and made that connection to EVE in a groundbreaking way that no games have ever done. We've put in the fittings. We've put in the skill points and the currencies and things. But there was sort of a deeper meaning to that part of the EVE universe that we hadn't quite realized yet, right? That the idea that I can go, you know, that if I've been flying in New Eden for 10 years now, that I want to go down on those planets, and I don't just want to go get into a shooter for 5 minutes in a death match, right? I want to walk around. I want to put my boots on the ground. I want to see what's out there, right? I mean, I'm mining these planets and asteroids from space. Why can't I do that on the planets themselves? This is where the philosophy of what Legion should be started. And so the idea of Project Legion was, look, there are a number of things that we believe can be and should be part of a first-person sandbox experience, right? We're not the only people in the business now working on first-person sandboxes, if you will, right? You look at things where again, the harvesting on a world, if you will, the mining, in some games it's forestry, right? It's, you know, things like this. It's fishing. In EVE, it's very different, of course, right? And there is an idea of what, you know, scavenging a battlefield could look like, right? The idea that I go down to a battlefield where a great dust battle has happened in some way, and the place is littered with biomass of corpses and wreckage of machinery and drones and vehicles, and there's money to be made there, right? You know, to go there and find those components. Well, what happens when I go down to that battlefield and I start scavenging, and I'm with a few friends, and then there's another group there somewhere in the distance that we can see, right? This is not something we were able to do yet in Dust. There are a number of reasons for that, but as we started thinking about, this is the vision. We have an idea here of trying to emulate that same idea of, you know, the first time a pilot in EVE goes out into low sec, you know, it becomes a lot more real and a lot more dangerous. And bringing that element to Dust is something that we felt was very important. As we started thinking about what that sort of vision looked like, it became apparent to us not only did we need to think about getting back to our roots on the PC, but also that in many ways we were making an entirely different game. And hence, Project Legion is that prototype idea that we brought to FanFest, and we've been socializing with our community here, but it does feel like it is the next generation for Dust 514, built on that same infrastructure and vision, but taking it into, if you will, a next generation of experiences.
And you mentioned sort of with Dust 514 being a PS3 game, Legion back to PC. Are you guys at all thinking, dabbling, thoughts about straying back into sort of like new gen consoles at all? I mean, what's the idea there?
We have a long way to go before we can do that, right? I mean, Project Legion is still very much a prototype. It's a very promising idea, but at this point, it's still a bit of an idea. Whoa, sorry about that. It's still got a lot of refinement to do, and we need to see a lot more progress there, and we need to hear a lot more from our gamers and make sure that this is the direction that they are comfortable with. You know, for us, CCP has been a very ambitious company, and we have been a company that has maybe gotten a little ahead of ourselves at times. This is not something we want to repeat with Legion. We want to focus on this experience. We want to make it amazing. We want to get it right on the PC. And when that happens, and if that happens, then we'll take a look at what other platforms make sense. But right now, there's no discussion of this at all.
Listen, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Have a great E3.
Absolutely. Great to see you. Thanks for coming to visit us.